I was 19 when I realized something most people never admit out loud. No one in my family wanted me to succeed more than they needed me to fail. That sounds dramatic, I know. At the time, I didn't even understand it myself. I just felt it, the quiet tension whenever I talked about plans, the way conversations died when I mentioned work, the forced smiles that never reached my parents' eyes. I grew up in a house where potential was always talked about, but only when it belonged to my sister. She was the golden child. The one who needed support. The one whose mistakes were always someone else's fault. If she failed a class, it was because the teacher was unfair. If she quit a job, it was because the environment was toxic. If she needed money, it was because life had been too hard on her. I was the opposite. I was independent. I was strong. I was told I'd figure it out. Which is just a polite way of saying, don't ask us for anything. So I stopped asking. At 16, I started working. Nothing impressive, online gigs, small contracts, boring digital work that paid per task. While my friends were hanging out after school, I was learning how invoices worked. While my sister slept in, I was up answering emails from clients in different time zones. No one noticed, and honestly, I preferred it that way. By 18, I had something most people didn't expect: consistency. Not success, not money pouring in, just consistency. Enough work coming in every month that I could plan instead of panic. Enough savings that I didn't feel trapped. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I registered my own business. No big announcement, no family meeting. I filled out the paperwork alone, sitting at my desk at 2 a.m., heart pounding like I was doing something illegal. It felt unreal seeing my name listed as the owner. My first office was a converted storage unit. No windows, no heat, just concrete walls and a cheap desk I bought secondhand. But every dollar that came in was mine. Every mistake was mine too. I worked harder than I ever thought possible. Nights blurred into mornings. Weekends stopped existing. I learned skills I never planned to learn: accounting, negotiation, contracts, crisis management. Every problem felt like it might sink me, and every time I survived, I grew sharper. By 19, something unexpected happened. The debt was gone. All of it. Student loans, credit cards, every weight I had been carrying quietly, paid off. I stared at the zero balance on my screen for a long time, waiting for fear to come back. It didn't. That was when I decided to buy a house. Not because I wanted to show off. Not because I wanted approval. I was just tired of uncertainty. Tired of landlords. Tired of knowing one bad month could ruin everything. I bought it in cash. Signing those papers felt heavier than starting the business. Not because I was scared. But because I knew, deep down, that once my family found out, nothing would be the same. I still told them. I don't know why. Maybe a part of me hoped they'd be proud. Maybe I wanted, just once, to hear, "You did well," without a comparison attached. At first, they acted impressed. My mother kept asking how much it cost. My father wanted to know how I managed it so fast. My sister smiled, nodded, and barely spoke. But admiration has an expiration date when entitlement is involved. Within days, the questions shifted. Why didn't I help my sister more? Why didn't I include the family? Why was I making decisions alone when we're supposed to be a unit? I explained, calmly, that I had done this on my own. That I had worked for years without support. That I wasn't refusing to help, I was just finally stable. That's when my mother said the sentence that changed everything: "Just because you earned it doesn't mean it's only yours." I laughed. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Over the next few weeks, my parents' tone hardened. They stopped asking and started telling. Telling me what I should do with my money. Telling me how much I owed the family. Telling me my sister deserved a chance at the same life. Then one evening, my sister finally said what they'd all been thinking. "You took the life that was meant for me." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It never came. I moved out emotionally after that. Less calls. Shorter visits. I focused on work and ignored the growing pressure. I thought it would blow over. I was wrong. 2 months later, a courier knocked on my door. The envelope was thick, official, heavy in a way that made my stomach drop before I even opened it. Inside was a lawsuit. My parents were suing me. They claimed I had used family advantage. That my business benefited from shared resources. That my assets should be reconsidered for the sake of fairness. They weren't asking for help. They were trying to take what I built. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call them. I called a lawyer. And as we went through the documents together, she paused at one detail, tapped the page, and looked up at me. Did they know about this clause? I shook my head. She smiled, slowly. They just made a very expensive mistake. The clause wasn't hidden. That was the part that made everything almost laughable. As my lawyer scrolled through the lawsuit on her tablet, she explained it slowly, like she was making sure I understood just how badly my parents had miscalculated. They were claiming that my business had benefited from family support. That my success wasn't entirely independent. That because they had provided a home during my early years, they were entitled to a share of the outcome. What they didn't realize was that 3 years earlier, when I'd first started getting serious contracts, I had signed a separation agreement. At the time, it felt unnecessary, almost dramatic, but I had done it anyway. The agreement stated, in clear legal language, that I was financially independent from my family, that no shared resources were being used, and that any future income, property, or business assets were solely mine. It had been notarized, filed, and signed by witnesses, including my parents. Back then, they hadn't even read it properly. They were too busy dismissing my little project to think it mattered. Now, it mattered more than anything. My lawyer leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. Not only does this invalidate their claim, she said, it puts them at risk. Risk how? I asked. She turned the tablet toward me and highlighted a section I hadn't noticed. False claims. Bad faith litigation. Attempted asset seizure. If the court decides this lawsuit was filed to intimidate or coerce, she continued, they could be ordered to pay damages. And your legal fees. For the first time since opening that envelope, I felt something loosen in my chest. But relief didn't mean peace. Because legal battles don't stay in court, they spill into families. The moment my parents realized I wasn't panicking, the calls started. At first, they were polite. My mother left voicemails talking about misunderstandings and family discussions. My father texted about how lawyers complicate things and how we should handle this privately. I didn't respond. Then the tone changed. My sister messaged me late one night. You really did this to us? Do you know how embarrassing this is? Everyone thinks we raised a monster. I stared at the screen for a long time. I typed one sentence. I didn't do this. You did. And I blocked her. A week later, the court date was set. Walking into that building felt surreal. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't scared. I felt detached, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. My parents sat across the room from me. They didn't look at me at first. When they did, it wasn't hatred I saw. It was confusion. They genuinely believed they were right. That belief crumbled fast. Our lawyer presented the separation agreement. The judge asked when it had been signed. My parents' lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Then came the bank records. Years of deposits, contracts, tax filings, proof that my business had been built without a single dollar from anyone else. The judge didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. When my parents' attorney finally tried to argue that family expectations should be considered, the judge stopped him mid-sentence. This court deals in law, he said flatly. Not entitlement. I didn't look at my parents when the ruling came down. Case dismissed. Not only that, my parents were ordered to cover my legal fees. The courtroom emptied quickly after that. People moved on to their next cases, their next dramas. But my parents stayed seated. Frozen. Outside, my father finally spoke. You could have stopped this, he said quietly. I turned to him. So could you. That should have been the end. It wasn't. 2 days later, my sister showed up at my house. Unannounced. I didn't open the door at first. I watched her through the camera as she paced, checked her phone, knocked again. Finally, I opened it just enough to speak. You won, she said. Isn't that enough? I studied her face. She looked tired, not broken, not remorseful, just frustrated that the world hadn't bent the way she expected. You don't want peace, I said calmly. You want access. Her expression hardened. You think you're better than us now. No, I replied. I think I'm done. She laughed bitterly. You really think this ends here? I looked her straight in the eye. I know it does. Because while she had been knocking on my door, something else had been happening quietly, something she didn't know about yet. Something far bigger than the lawsuit. The thing my sister didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the lawsuit had triggered more than just a court response. When my parents filed those papers, they hadn't only gone after me. They had gone after my credibility, my independence, my finances. And when you do that to someone who runs a registered business, the ripples don't stop at family drama. They reach institutions, banks, auditors, partners. A week after the case was dismissed, I got an email from my bank's compliance department. Routine, polite, but firm. Because once a legal dispute over assets is recorded, automatic reviews happen. Nothing to fear on my end. Everything to fear on theirs. My parents had been listed, by their own lawyer, as financial contributors in their claim. That meant their accounts, past transfers, and statements were now being reviewed to verify the story they had told the court. The story that wasn't true. Within days, questions started piling up. Unexplained transfers to my sister. Tax inconsistencies. Undeclared gifts that crossed reporting thresholds. They hadn't planned for scrutiny. They had lived too long believing family actions stayed invisible. They don't. The first call came from my mother, crying. They froze our account, she said. Just temporarily. It's probably a mistake. I said nothing. The second call came from my father, voice shaking with anger this time. You could fix this, he said. You started all of this. I replied calmly. You did. When you went to court. Then came the one call I hadn't expected. From my sister's employer. She worked in finance. Mid-level, not powerful, but regulated. They had been notified of the legal proceedings because her name appeared repeatedly in the documentation. Transfers. Dependency claims. Statements about shared assets. They asked her questions. She didn't have good answers. 2 weeks later, she was placed on administrative leave. By then, the family narrative had completely collapsed. Relatives stopped calling me, not because they were angry, because they were embarrassed. Neighbors whispered. Friends distanced themselves from my parents quietly, the way people do when they sense legal smoke. My parents tried to salvage things. They offered apologies that didn't quite reach accountability. We didn't think it would go this far. We were just trying to protect the family. You know how your sister is. I listened once. Then I said the truth they'd avoided since I was a teenager. You didn't want to protect the family. You wanted to control the outcome. Silence followed. Months passed. The audits concluded. My parents were fined for reporting violations. Nothing criminal, but expensive enough to sting. Their savings took a hit they hadn't planned for. My sister lost her job quietly. No announcement, no scandal, just a line on her resume that would never be explained properly. And me? I moved on. The business grew, slowly, cleanly. I hired people who didn't know my family name. I bought another property, this time under a holding structure my lawyer insisted on. I learned how to separate my life into compartments no one could invade again. The last time I saw my parents was at a distant relative's funeral. We nodded at each other. Polite. Final. My sister didn't approach me. She didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been settled, by law, by consequence, by reality. I had built a business at 19. I had bought a home with my own money. And when my parents tried to take it to court, they learned something they should have understood years earlier: success you don't help build isn't something you get to claim. They thought the courtroom would give them power. Instead, it gave them exposure. And I never had to raise my voice once.